The courtroom in downtown Tampa was packed to capacity on a humid Wednesday morning, with overflow crowds watching on screens in the hallway as one of the most unlikely legal battles in recent Florida history reached its dramatic conclusion. On one side sat former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, immaculate in a Navy suit, her legal team arranged like a corporate phalanx around her. On the other side, 23-year-old Carlos Mendoza sat alone except for his public defender, still wearing his subway uniform because he'd come straight from his overnight shift. What happened over the next 3 hours would not only vindicate a minimum wage worker against one of Florida's most powerful political figures, but would also expose a pattern of behavior that would send shockwaves through the state's political establishment. The story began 6 months earlier on a seemingly ordinary Thursday evening at a Subway restaurant in an upscale Tampa shopping district. Carlos had been working there for 2 years, saving money for community college while supporting his younger sister after their parents had been deported. He was known for his infectious smile and his ability to remember regular customers' orders, the kind of employee who made a routine sandwich run feel like a visit with an old friend. That evening, around 7:30, Pam Bondi walked in, talking loudly on her phone about an upcoming television appearance, according to witness testimony that would later prove crucial. Bondi was already agitated when she entered the store, apparently upset about something related to her media schedule. She continued her phone conversation while Carlos patiently waited to take her order, occasionally looking up and nodding to indicate he was ready whenever she was. After nearly 5 minutes, she ended her call and rattled off a complex order, with multiple modifications, still looking at her phone. Carlos, as he always did, repeated the order back to confirm he'd gotten it right. What happened next was captured on the store's security cameras, footage that would eventually be played countless times across social media and news outlets. Bondi apparently didn't like something about how Carlos had repeated her order, later claiming she detected attitude in his voice. She launched into a tirade that lasted nearly 4 minutes, calling him incompetent, questioning whether he could even understand English properly, and demanding to speak to his manager. When Carlos calmly informed her that he was the shift's supervisor, she laughed derisively and said, "Of course you are. This is what happens when we lower standards." Carlos maintained his composure throughout the incident, professionally completing her order despite the verbal assault. But Bondi wasn't finished. As she left, she turned back and said, loud enough for everyone in the store to hear, "I'll have your job by tomorrow. You have no idea who you're dealing with." She then took out her phone and appeared to take photos of Carlos and the store. True to her word, within hours, the Subway location was flooded with calls from various officials about health code violations, permit issues, and employee documentation. The franchise owner, David Park, Korean-American businessman who owned 12 Subway locations across Tampa, was shocked when he started receiving threatening messages about his business licenses. Health inspectors showed up the next morning for a random inspection, followed by fire marshals and then immigration officials asking for employee documentation. It became clear that someone with significant influence was targeting his business. And it didn't take long to connect the dots back to Bondi's visit. What Bondi hadn't counted on was that Carlos Mendoza, despite being a sandwich maker, was not someone who could be easily intimidated. He had been born in Florida, was a citizen, had grown up watching his parents navigate a system that often seemed stacked against people like them. He'd also been recording the aftermath of Bondi's visit on his phone, capturing her license plate and her continued threats in the parking lot. More importantly, he had something Bondi didn't expect: the solidarity of his community and the power of social media. Carlos's younger sister, Sophia, a senior at the University of Tampa studying social justice and communications, took the security footage and her brother's phone recordings and created a TikTok video that would change everything. Within 48 hours, the video had 10 million views. The hashtag #SubwayCarlos began trending, and suddenly, It's a story of a powerful political figure trying to destroy a minimum wage worker's life over a sandwich. Order was national news. The public response was overwhelming. People began showing up at the subway location to support Carlos, buying sandwiches and leaving massive tips. A GoFundMe started by a customer raised over $300,000 for Carlos's legal defense and education fund within a week. Local activists organized protests outside Bondi's office, and several prominent attorneys volunteered to represent Carlos pro bono. The David versus Goliath narrative captured the public imagination. But the real bombshell was yet to come. An investigative journalist from the Tampa Bay Times, following up on the story, discovered that this wasn't Bondi's first such incident. Through public records requests and interviews with service industry workers across Florida, a pattern emerged of Bondi using her influence to retaliate against people she felt had wronged her. From restaurant servers to retail workers to parking attendants, the investigation revealed at least 17 similar incidents over the past 5 years. Though most victims had been too frightened to come forward, the revelation prompted Carlos to take legal action with the help of his new legal team, led by civil rights attorney Maria Rodriguez. He filed a lawsuit against Bondi for harassment, abuse of power, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of his civil rights. The lawsuit also named several state agencies that had participated in the retaliatory actions, arguing they had been weaponized for personal vendettas rather than legitimate governmental purposes. Bondi's response was swift and predictable. She denied all allegations, claiming the entire incident had been blown out of proportion and that Carlos was simply seeking a payday. Her legal team, some of the most expensive attorneys in Florida, filed motion after motion trying to get the case dismissed. They argued that Bondi had qualified immunity as a former state official, that there was no proof she had orchestrated the agency visits, and that even if she had, she was simply reporting legitimate concerns about a business establishment. But the evidence against Bondi continued to mount. Whistleblowers from within state agencies came forward with emails and text messages showing Bondi's direct involvement in orchestrating the harassment campaign. One particularly damaging piece of evidence was a voicemail Bondi had left for a health department official saying, "I need you to find something wrong at that subway on Dale Mabry. I don't care what it is, just find something." The official had saved the message, troubled by the request but afraid to refuse. The case became about more than just Carlos and Bondi. It became a referendum on the abuse of power and the vulnerability of working-class Americans to retaliation. From the powerful, labor unions got involved, organizing rallies in support of Carlos. Civil rights organizations filed amicus briefs arguing that the case had implications for equal protection under the law. Even some conservative commentators, typically supportive of Bondi, expressed discomfort with her behavior, arguing that true conservatism meant respecting all workers, not just those in corner offices. As the trial date approached, more service workers came forward with their own stories about Bondi. A bartender from Miami testified that Bondi had gotten her fired after she accidentally spilled a drink. A valet parker from Orlando claimed Bondi had his car towing license revoked after a minor disagreement about parking spots. Each story followed the same pattern: a minor slight followed by disproportionate retaliation using the machinery of state government. The trial itself was a media circus. Court TV provided gavel-to-gavel coverage, and legal experts dissected every moment on cable news. Carlos, who had never sought the spotlight, handled himself with remarkable dignity on the witness stand. He spoke softly but clearly about his experience, about the fear he felt when immigration officials showed up asking about his documentation, despite his being a natural-born citizen, about how he couldn't sleep for weeks, worried that his sister would suffer retaliation. The turning point came when Bondi took the stand. Under cross-examination by Maria Rodriguez, her carefully constructed defense began to crumble. Rodriguez had done her homework, presenting Bondi with document after document showing her direct involvement in the harassment campaign. When confronted with the voicemail to the health department, Bondi claimed she didn't remember making it. When shown text messages she had sent to various officials, she argued they were taken out of context. Her testimony was evasive and often contradictory, and even her own attorneys looked uncomfortable. The most dramatic moment came when Rodriguez asked Bondi a simple question. "Ms. Bondi, do you believe that someone working at Subway deserves the same respect under the law as someone in your position?" Bondi's response, "That respect is earned," prompted audible gasps in the courtroom and would become the defining moment of the trial. Rodriguez followed up by asking if Bondi believed she had the right to use government resources to settle personal scores. Bondi's fumbling non-answer spoke volumes. Judge Patricia Williams, a nonsense jurist with 30 years on the bench, had seen enough. In her ruling, she didn't mince words. She called Bondi's behavior a grotesque abuse of power and antithetical to everything our justice system stands for. She found that Bondi had indeed orchestrated a campaign of harassment against Carlos and his employer, using her influence and connections to weaponize government agencies for personal revenge. The judge awarded Carlos $500,000 in compensatory damages and another $2 million in punitive damages, specifically noting that the punitive amount needed to be substantial enough to deter similar behavior from other powerful individuals. But Judge Williams went further. She referred the matter to the Florida Bar for investigation of Bondi's ethical violations, to the Department of Justice for potential criminal prosecution, and ordered that all state agencies involved conduct internal investigations into how they had been manipulated. She also issued an injunction preventing Bondi from having any contact with Carlos, his family, or his employer, and required her to issue a public apology. The courtroom erupted when the verdict was read. Carlos broke down in tears, embracing his sister and his attorney. Outside the courthouse, hundreds of supporters cheered as Carlos emerged, still looking somewhat stunned by the magnitude of his victory. In an impromptu press conference, he said he hoped his case would give courage to other workers who faced similar abuse, that standing up to power was scary but necessary, and that he planned to use the settlement money to attend college and start a foundation to help other service workers facing retaliation. Bondi's fall from grace was swift and comprehensive. Within days, she had lost her television contributor contracts. Her speaking engagements were canceled, and even political allies began distancing themselves from her. The Florida Bar launched a full investigation that could result in her disbarment. Several of the other service workers who had come forward during the trial filed their own lawsuits, emboldened by Carlos's victory. Federal investigators began examining whether Bondi's abuse of power extended to her tenure as Attorney General, potentially opening her up to further legal jeopardy. The case sparked a broader conversation about power dynamics in America, about how those in positions of authority could abuse their influence to crush those they saw as beneath them. Legislation was introduced in Florida, dubbed Carlos's Law, that would make it a felony to use government resources for personal retaliation. Similar bills were proposed in other states, with lawmakers recognizing that this issue transcended party lines. For David Park, the franchise owner who had stood by Carlos throughout the ordeal, the victory was bittersweet. His business had suffered during the harassment campaign, but the publicity from the trial had ultimately brought him more customers than ever. He gave Carlos a raise and offered to pay for his college education even before the settlement, saying that Carlos had shown the kind of courage and integrity that money couldn't buy. Park also became an advocate for small business owners, testifying before the state legislature about the need for protections against retaliatory government actions. The impact on workplace culture was significant. Companies across Florida and beyond began implementing stronger protections for service workers dealing with difficult customers. Training programs were developed to help employees handle situations involving powerful or influential individuals who might threaten retaliation. Some businesses even posted signs stating that abuse of their employees would not be tolerated. Regardless of the customer's status or connections, Carlos himself became an unlikely spokesperson for workers' rights. He continued working at Subway while attending community college, saying the job had taught him valuable lessons about dignity, perseverance, and standing up for what's right. He spoke at labor rallies and university events, always emphasizing that his victory wasn't just personal, but part of a larger struggle for equality and justice. His story was optioned for a movie, with proceeds going to his foundation supporting service workers. The legal precedent set by the case was substantial. Legal scholars wrote about how it expanded protections for workers against retaliation by powerful individuals, how it established clearer boundaries on the use of government resources, and how it reinforced the principle that justice should be blind to social status. The case was already being cited in law schools as an example of how the civil justice system could check abuses of power. As for Pam Bondi, her attempts to appeal the verdict failed, with higher courts affirming Judge Williams's ruling and praising her thorough analysis of the law. Bondi eventually issued the court-ordered public apology, though its sincerity was widely questioned. She retreated from public life, her political career effectively over, her reputation in tatters. Some saw her downfall as karmic justice, while others viewed it as a cautionary tale about the corrupting nature of power and the importance of accountability. The sandwich that started it all became something of a legend, with Subway actually adding the Carlos to their menu, a specially designed sub with proceeds supporting worker advocacy groups. It was a small gesture, but one that symbolized how a simple sandwich maker had stood up to power and won, proving that in America, at least sometimes, justice could prevail regardless of who you were or what job you held. The case of Carlos Mendoza versus Pam Bondi would be remembered not just as a legal victory, but as a moment when the American justice system lived up to its highest ideals, affirming that all people, whether they work in sandwich shops or corridors of power, deserve equal treatment under the law.